Hello everybody, my name is Kirsten. Thank you for joining us for the final day of our 4-H Food Revolution Kitchen Science experiments. This is going to be the final day of this week where we wrap up with two very interesting experiments. So without further ado, let's get started. Today we're going to be doing two experiments. One is a homemade lava lamp experiment and the other is something that's called the magic milk experiment. Both are very interesting, and today we're going to start with homemade lava lamps. So, like always, the first thing you're going to want to do is prepare your materials. So for this experiment, you are going to need, you can do a couple different things here. You can use water bottles, you can use mason jars or a glass cup, which is what I'm going to be using today. You can use plastic cups. Anything that is clear and you can see through the side will do just fine for this experiment. You will need food coloring, some type of oil. I'm using cooking oil today, but you can also use baby oil. Water, which I have here, and Alka-Seltzer tablets. It doesn't have to be the Alka-Seltzer brand, it can be any aspirin dissolvable tablet. Any of them will do just fine. So to get started with this, as always, we're going to measure out our ingredients and get them all mixed together. So the first thing that we're going to do is take whatever container that we're using. Like I said, today I'm going to be using this glass and fill it about 2/3 of the way full with oil. I've mentioned the past couple days with experiments that we've been doing and measuring and things of that nature that this is a good time to teach youth about measuring and fractions and math and converting measurements and things like that. This experiment's kind of interesting because it doesn't call for any exact measurements. So for example, we're just filling whatever size container we have about 2/3 of the way with oil. But if you would like to turn this into a math or measuring activity, you can certainly come up with amounts of oil and water and food coloring that you would like the kids to measure out to mix into their homemade lava lamp. Alright, so we got our oil set. The next thing that we're going to do is fill this the rest of the way with water. And again, I would recommend getting something to cover the table with. That's always a good idea. Alright, so I'm going to bring my glass up closer to the camera so you guys can see what's going on here. So, one of the things that makes this experiment cool is that we can look at the different properties of oil and water. So, if I can let some light shine through here, you guys can see that the water is at the bottom down here and the oil is at the top. The line that separates them is right about here, and there's lots of different bubbles. So, one of the things that makes this experiment cool is that water and oil have different properties, and when you try to mix them together, it doesn't quite work out. That's why you get to see these bubbles, and when we add the food coloring and the Alka-Seltzer, the difference in properties between the water and the oil is what's going to make this look like a lava lamp. So we've got our liquids all poured out, our oil and our water. The next thing we're going to do is add some food coloring. And like I mentioned the first day, my favorite color is yellow, which I would normally opt to do. However, the oil is kind of yellow, so I think I'll go with some blue here. And again, leaders, this is certainly an opportunity to talk about colors and primary, secondary colors, mixing colors with your youth. You can experiment. I could do red and blue and make some purple. I could do red and green. There's all sorts of different things that you can do here, but I'm just going to do one color. And I will come back over again to show you guys what this looks like. So you can kind of see there are little drops of food coloring in here. Again, the difference in properties between the food coloring, the oil, and the water causes them not to mix together like you would expect them to. So if we were putting drops of food coloring into water, it would mix in and turn the whole solution the color of the food dye, but because we're adding them to oil, they don't mix quite well, so you see the little individual drops. For this experiment, it's best not to mix the oil and the water and the food dye. Oh, you can see now. A little droplet of food coloring has made it through the layer of oil here, and now it's blending in with the water. So you can see in the top layer where the oil is, you get little droplets of food dye, but once it seeps through to the water, it starts to mix in. So that's a great example of the difference between the properties of water and oil. What I was saying is that it's best not to stir up your mixture here. One, because oil and water don't mix particularly well, and the more bubbles you have, the cooler it's going to look. And also because not mixing it together makes the lava lamp just look cooler anyways. So what we're going to do now that we have this all mixed up, oil and water is all set, color is added, we're going to add an Alka-Seltzer tablet. And this is going to create a disturbance in the water because Alka-Seltzer will react with the water, not oil. And that is enough to disturb the oil in the food dye and make this look like a lava lamp. I'm going to bring this up close for you guys to see here. So we have our water in the bottom layer and our oil in the top layer. I dropped the Alka-Seltzer tablet into the bottom, so it's in the water portion down here that's dark blue, reacting with the water, and it's causing a disturbance in the oil and making little bubbles. That's what makes it look like a lava lamp. So you can see the bubbles from the oil and the food dye forming, and now we're getting a little bit of a mixture of the food dye and the water, and it looks like a lava lamp. And this is certainly a fun one to do if you mix different colors. Like I mentioned before, you don't want to stir the food coloring into the water or the oil. So if you were to do more than one color, you would have different color droplets, and you could see the colors mixing as the reaction is taking place. And this lasts for a pretty long time, depending on how much water you use, how many Alka-Seltzer tablets you use. Again, this is a great opportunity to teach youth about trial and error. Maybe you have too much water and you only use one Alka-Seltzer tablet and you don't get the reaction that you were quite hoping for. That's a great time to go back and evaluate what you can do differently to improve for the next time. Same thing with this one. I was actually kind of worried that we were going to bubble over the end of the glass here, which thankfully we didn't. But that's another thing. If you have a little bit of an overflow, maybe use less water or a smaller chunk of the tablet. Lots of different opportunities to use trial and error to evaluate how your experiments are working out. Alrighty, so that is our homemade lava lamp experiment. I'm going to leave this sitting on the table here. This will go for a pretty long time, not quite as active as it was when we first added the tablet, but if you stir it a little bit, shake it up, you get some more bubbles coming up. This is something that you could leave out on your counter for the day for your kids to take a look at, or if you're having like a 4-H meeting or something like that, you could do it at the beginning of the meeting, let them sit out, see what happens to them the longer they sit. Depending on how they're mixed differently, what the colors might look like, any opportunity you have to get your youth thinking about, well, what does this reaction mean? What do we do differently this time that made it change from the first time we did it? Always a great thing to hold on to. So, all right, moving on to our magic milk experiment. This one is another very simple one, just like the lava lamp. Like I mentioned once before, all of this stuff you can find in your kitchen. Maybe not the Alka-Seltzer, but those are 50 cents at the gas station, and then you have a cool lava lamp to last you for the day. Make sure I keep that in frame there. All right, so same thing when we begin with this experiment. We're going to want to gather our materials first. So what you'll need for this is whole milk, and it's important that you have whole milk, and I'll talk about that, why it's important to use whole milk in just a few minutes here. We'll need some dish soap, some cotton swabs or Q-tips, and a saucer to pour our milk in, food coloring, and a smaller container for our dish soap. So those are our materials for this experiment. The first thing that we're going to do for this is take our saucer here and our whole milk and pour just enough milk in to cover the bottom of the saucer, and then a little extra. So we don't want to fill the container too much, but we want to make sure that the bottom of the pan is completely covered. All right, just gonna rinse my hands off. All right, so we have our saucer, we have our milk. The next thing that we're gonna do is take our food dye, and this one we're gonna mix lots of colors in. We're just gonna add a couple drops of color all around the milk in any design that you want. You can leave the drops as they are, you can mix them around, you can do whatever you would like. This is definitely one of the more creative experiments that you can do. You can choose color themes. Depending on the time of year you're doing this experiment, you could do Christmas colors, you could do Halloween colors, you could do spring colors, make it into a kind of theme depending on when you may be doing this activity with your 4-Hers. Today I'm just going to be using all the colors that I have available so that this turns out pretty cool. Alright, so once you're satisfied with the color that you have added to your plate here, again, you can mix it, you can leave it, you can do whatever you'd like. And I'd like to remind everyone that you can also look up into this mirror to see. I know it's kind of far away. I'll do my best to hold this up to show you without spilling it all over the place. But just keep your eye in the mirror so you can see. So we have our milk, we have our food dye. The next thing that we're gonna do is pour a little bit of dish soap into our smaller container, just enough so that we can dip our cotton swabs in it and cover the end. So once we have that, we'll take a cotton swab here and dip this into the soap. You're gonna wanna cover the end completely. I don't know if you guys can see that. It's a little far away, but you're gonna want to make sure that you completely submerge your Q-tip and have it dripping like this. Kind of looks like honey. So once we have our cotton swab prepared, the next step is very simple. All you're gonna wanna do is touch your milk saucer with the food dye in it with the cotton swab, and we'll see what happens here. And I would like to remind everyone again, the mirror is probably the best way that you'll be able to see this. The colors running away, per lack of better word, from the soap. I'm going to get a fresh swab and bring the plate over to the camera so hopefully you guys can see a little bit better what's happening here. All right, got my soap, got my saucer, and this does look very cool. Okay. Let me see if I can angle this camera down a little bit here. All right, so we got our bowl, our colors mixing together. I have my Q-tip with my dish soap, and when I touch the milk, oh, of course, now it's not gonna mix as much as it did before. But you can kind of see that the colors are running away from the Q-tip. Do my best not to spill this everywhere. All right, so the reason that this experiment works is because dish soap is meant to break down fats, and whole milk has a lot of fat in it. I mentioned before that it's really important for this experiment that you use whole milk instead of 1%, 2%, or something that has low fat, because the nature of the dish soap and how it chases fat is what makes this experiment cool. So whole milk has a lot of fat in it, and when you add the food dye, it allows you to see how the milk interacts with the dish soap. So when you touch the soap to the milk, the soap chases the fat molecules that are in the milk, and the food dye allows us to see this. So the first time I touched the Q-tip to the milk, the colors dispersed and went far away. And that is just a visual representation of the soap chasing the fat molecules in the milk. And now this just looks like a mess because all the colors mixed together. But when we first got started, you could see the streaks of color running in different directions. You can touch the milk in several different places. It kind of looks like fireworks. It's very interesting. And this is another good opportunity to teach youth about color mixing, different properties of different materials that we might be using for an experiment. And also just a chance to talk about maybe some nutrition if you'd like. This is Food Revolution after all. So we're using milk here. We talked about how it has some fat in there. You can talk about other properties of milk, things that make that important to our diet, and other related things of that nature. So that brings me to the end of both of our experiments for today. As always, I'll talk a little bit about cleanup. These two are very easy. You can pour everything down the sink. Just make sure that you dispose of it all properly, clean your dishes, put everything back where it goes. The homemade lava lamps with the Alka-Seltzer, just be careful as you're pouring it. Sometimes it gets a little fizzy when you're moving it around, or you can leave it out for the day and have a nice lava lamp to entertain your youth with. But other than that, everything can go down the drain, get washed and put away, and then you're ready to grab some more friends and have more fun doing science in the kitchen. So that is the conclusion of our 4-H Food Revolution Kitchen Science Experiment Week. I hope that everyone who has taken a look at these videos has learned something new and has enjoyed this little segment. Going forward, Food Revolution will always have a virtual section to it, so we'll have the in-person camp, and we'll also be doing live videos like this with science activities, STEM activities, experiments, cooking, outdoor activities, crafts, things of that nature. So this is our first step moving in that direction. And like I said, I hope that you all enjoyed. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you all for 4-H Food Revolution next summer.